So I'm Stephanie, this is my colleague Ray, and this is our other colleague Jennifer, and we'll be doing this morning's workshop. As you know, at Fulfilling Lives Lambeth, Southwark and Lewisham, we work alongside people who experience multiple disadvantage. This refers to a combination of mental ill health, homelessness, drug and alcohol use, and interactions with the criminal justice system. Our aim has always been to influence the system so that people experiencing multiple disadvantage can have improved access to support. In order to create change, we focus on impacting the way people are supported through policy and practice, working together as equals on a shared goal, and providing support in a different way, working alongside people, building trusting relationships. So this workshop is an opportunity to consider some of our learnings in more detail, and in this session we'll be looking at informed approaches and organisational change to explore what informed approaches means and why organisational change is crucial to it, so that you leave here knowing how you can support changing the system for the better. What we will be covering, what informed approaches are, what is an informed organisation, the importance of staff well-being, what we did to become better at being informed approach, and the informed approach toolkit, what we would like for you to take away, and right at the end, hopefully, we'll have some time for some questions.
Okay, so what are informed approaches? So informed approaches is the collective understanding of how trauma, gender, culture impacts on a person when accessing services and support. The aim is to create a shared understanding of how these three intersections of identities are understood. So trauma-informed practices are well known in organisation and community services. However, often the impact of gender and culture, as well as the impact on staff well-being, takes a secondary role when trauma-informed practices are implemented in services. So what tends to happen is the trauma bit is focused on, and this gender especially, and especially culture, because culture can be a really difficult conversation to have within organisations, and many organisations tend to avoid it. And also staff well-being really takes a secondary approach as well, a lot because for some, well-being isn't often commissioned into services. There isn't often a budget for staff well-being, but staff well-being is really important because they're the people who are delivering direct support to the people we work alongside. In an informed approach, trauma, gender and culture and staff well-being are all seen as equally important and vital pillars to the cultural, practical and policy transformation within an organisation and the wider community. So first of all, trauma. Trauma-informed means understanding how trauma is experienced across a wide range of human emotions and physical symptoms, and how it impacts on how we engage the people we work with into services and the relationship that we build with them. Understanding the impact of trauma and how trauma can be a barrier to those accessing and transitioning between services is crucial. We know that many of the people we work alongside have experienced trauma, and it can have a major disruption on their thoughts, feelings and behaviours. So there's a term, Ultragenic Harm, and it refers to the harm caused inadvertently by the process of treatment. By understanding the impact of trauma, the goal is to have services that understand trauma and then make every possible attempt not to re-traumatise those that access services. At Fulfilling Lives, a major focus of our work has been about understanding how trauma impacts on how people build and maintain relationships and the importance of the relationship that the person has with staff. It's often been the cultivating of this relationship which has determined whether someone continues to access our service. Our understanding of trauma-informed informs our understanding of the relational aspect of our work. And it's really important to mention that this isn't about labelling people. This is about understanding how trauma affects someone, or someone's life experiences affects how they access services, how they communicate, how they build relationships. And once we understand that, then we can focus on the strength-based approaches, looking at their strengths and building from that. It's not about labelling people as this person, has experienced trauma and they're just stereotyping people again. Adverse childhood experiences. So adverse childhood experiences are potentially traumatic events occurring in childhood. So this is a chart of the ACEs experienced by those with multiple disadvantage that we've worked with. ACEs can be useful, but we also have to recognise that they do not cover all potential childhood traumas. So there's very select questions that are asked. And many experiences are also adverse adult experiences as well. But it can be a useful indication, because I know that the statistics say that if you've got two people who have high ACEs score, then the likelihood is that their children as well are going to have high ACEs scores. But at the same time, it has to be used in the right way. I know that the people who originally designed ACEs are quite flabbergasted how it's been used in some aspects. Like I think in the States, there's been times where it's been used to stop children going to certain schools. And it's also, ACEs have also been used to stop people moving into certain areas as well. So it can be used in a really detrimental way. So it has to be taken, you have to use it in context.
Gender. Being gender informed means services understand and respond to the issues faced by women and girls. So one thing that we know is that men and women experience trauma in different ways, especially interpersonal violence. So right from a young age to adulthood, there are many factors that can happen, i.e. relationships with family members, romantic relationships, etc., that can affect the experiences of both men and women. And one thing that we have found is that most services, whether it was drug and alcohol, etc., are catered specifically for men. So the what we're pushing for now is what we're advocating for now is like being gender informed and being able to meet the needs of women and girls. Culture, being culturally informed means there's an understanding of how different cultures build and maintain relationships, as they're equally important. Understanding generational transition of trauma and the barriers to those that need access to services must be understood. When we do not have an understanding of cultural differences and the differing needs and goals, if they're not added into services, we create a feeling of otherness, which can reinforce a sense of I don't belong for people of colour. So we believe in valuing the individual and their context, including the person's intersection of identities. This is true for both the workforce and the people that are supported.
Okay, so what is an informed organisation? Trauma, gender and culturally informed training alone does not make an organisation informed, nor does sticking a bowl of fruit in the reception. It takes a systematic approach to change how services are delivered. Everyone in the organisation, from front of house security to the person who inputs data to senior management, should have an understanding of informed approaches. And policies and practices should be aligned with an informed approach. To have an informed organisational approach is to be on a journey of transformation, organisationally as well as individually. It's a journey that evolves as our understanding of trauma, gender and culture evolves. There's no end point where an organisation is informed. It's a continuous commitment to change and transformation so that the people we work alongside are treated with fairness, empathy and justice. As an organisation, it supports wellness and resilience, and the staff that work along them receive the same compassion and understanding. It's quite often the case that we're really kind of compassionate and empathetic towards the people we work with, but actually towards other staff members, sometimes that compassion and understanding isn't there. It takes a cultural change in an organisation to start to build an informed service. Organisational change needs to be cultivated, and it needs buy-in from everyone at all levels. So it's done alongside staff and they don't feel done to. A question for you all, why is staff wellbeing important?
Don't all rush at once.
Just shout out at me. Why do you think staff wellbeing is important? Yeah, if we're not okay, then we can't, then we're not our best selves to support that person. What else?
Is your role modelling some sort of self-care?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, if we can't look after ourselves, then how are we going to model that to the people we work with? Anything else?
Anyone from this side? No pressure.
The work's challenging, absolutely. And what can happen when it's challenging is that staff can experience these three things. So first of all, secondary vicarious trauma is an indirect experience or exposure to a traumatic event. For example, hearing a first-hand account of the event given by survivors, can be a traumatic and emotionally challenging experience for the person receiving it. Healthcare providers and mental health workers are both frequently exposed to traumatic events in this manner. So compassion fatigue. Compassion fatigue is apathy or indifference towards the suffering of others as a result of overexposure to trauma. Burnout. Burnout is a state of physical and emotional exhaustion. It can occur when you experience long-term stress in your job or when you've worked in physically or emotional draining roles for a long time. Moral injury. So moral injury is a violation of what someone believes may be right, resulting in experiencing persistent self-criticism, feeling unworthy, unforgivable, or permanently damaged. Reflecting on the perceived transgression can fill a person with sorrow and bitterness. So staff have their own history of trauma. Staff that are not supported to manage their well-being can experience secondary trauma, burnout, and compassion fatigue. Training staff on informed practices and then not changing the processes and the structure of an organisation to allow staff to incorporate and practice what they have learned can lead to moral injury. So trauma-informed training works against what we call Ultragenic Harm, that harm that can occur inadvertently because of treatment. And what happens is that because it works against that, if your staff that are now being trained on that, and and then you think to yourself, well, actually, what I've been doing for all of these years might have been harming staff, but then you're not given the room by your organisation to change those practices. So if you're only given like half a day's treatment, then this is what can happen. You can end up with moral injury because of that. Teaching staff the impact of how they've been working on those who experience trauma without allowing them what they need to work in a new way means they continue to witness the pain and suffering of others, but have no means to respond, and this can lead to compassion fatigue and burnout. Every attempt must be made to support staff wellbeing and to provide safe spaces for staff to reflect on the impact that the work has on them. Reflective practice must be the norm, not the exception. We believe in treating employees in a way that allows them to do their job to the best of their abilities and in turn reduce staff turnover, sickness and dissatisfaction. Supporting staff to cultivate a culture of reflecting instead of reacting. Create a culture where staff can be innovative to think, reflect and explore without a culture of fear, stress and trauma.
So, given all of this information, what did we do to improve our services? We developed a staff training package. We delivered an informed approach champion pilot. We conducted a trauma-informed care assessment. We supported and developed work on our racial equalities project. We established a wellbeing forum, and we delivered external events, forums, blogs, media posts, which were a reflection of the work that we was doing at the time. So our trauma-informed project is made up of staff across the whole of Fulfilling Lives LSL, including managers, innovation partners, link workers, community link workers, and one certitude member. The overaiming goals were to create, plan, and implement and reflect on the informed approach work within Fulfilling Lives. Its remit included creating and monitoring an action log to oversee the work, address barriers, and to keep the project to its timelines. The Informed Approach project meets once a month to update the action log and to make decisions on moving the project forward. So our work that focused on gender, we we did a lot of work that focused on women's access to drug and alcohol treatment. Like I said before, a lot of the services made available are specifically tailored to men. So we met with women that were once supported by our organisation, but also women within our boroughs. And through the use of focus groups, interviews, group interviews, questionnaires, we just gathered all of their experience, and we used that knowledge further by producing reports, speaking to commissioners and letting them know that there is a demand. And these women that have lived experience, they have such a wealth of knowledge that it is easily overlooked. So we used it as almost like a supporting case, as evidence almost, to be like, okay, so this is what we found, and this is not, we're not making it up. These are what the women are saying. We've met with commissioners, we've used our learning for other organisations in our boroughs as well, and hopefully, you know, more people like pick up that pace and yeah, it doesn't lose momentum. Culture. So our journey into becoming culturally informed was viewed and developed through workforce development and staff training. So we went through some training such as unconscious bias, developing reflective skills and cultural competency. We chose these trainings in particular because they highlight the greatness and implications of difference, language and communication. We are aware that policy and professional protocol inhibits authentic or risky communication. Meaningful change requires both organisational and individual courage. There is a need of self-awareness when you're looking at people's cultures. Transparency and presence, noticing and working with our own defences, experiencing privilege, power, and developing intentionality. Introducing a model of intercultural competency enhanced our empathy and deep listening practice, which helped us avoid difference evasion. Difference is a barrier, but explicit and authentic communication helps the threshold into the world of the other. Developing true frontline co-production, collaborative development of a relationship. So with us in particular, our racial qualities work came alive after George Floyd's murder. And this was difficult to implement because the structure and the organisation was already existing before we decided to look at racial qualities or cultural competencies, etc. However, our turning points and things that did go well we have been able to hold reflective spaces and have external professionals come in to facilitate a safe space where people have been allowed, let's say, to speak of their experiences and use those experiences to help create a reality that will help us adapt how we work to the people that we support that might have similar experiences to us. So the fact that we have embarked on such a journey in exploring culture sets us apart from some other organisations in our sector. Becoming more culturally informed has given us a better understanding of the differences people in the workforce and people we support experience. We would strongly advise other organisations to explore cultural differences and similarities in order to continue working on system. Now, some of the barriers that we have faced is, aside the system already existing before this piece of work, is that, you know, some staff members found speaking about their experience really tiring, you know, especially in that time where it was really the focal point. Not everyone may see the importance of the work, hence why it's easy to overlook, like staff wellbeing and stuff on gender as well. So given our experiences and what we've learned, it's still a very strong recommendation that we'll give when working with informed approaches, because it does make a difference to the lives of the people that you support, but also the lives of people that work in your workforce.
Okay, so the informed approach pilot considered how we could support external agencies to embed the knowledge we have acquired through our own journey to become more trauma, gender and culturally informed. One of the major barriers to organisations implementing informed approaches is time and resources. We recognise that many external services have staff that carry high caseloads, although we don't like that word caseloads, but have work with a lot of people and do not have access to good quality training. We considered how we could offer a package of training and support that could start the process of spreading knowledge of informed approaches into services and to start the process of creating a community of informed approach practitioners. So approximately 32 champions across Lewisham, Lambeth and Southwark were chosen. The champion roles consisted of individuals identified in services and organisations who would serve as role models for all staff on the practical aspects of being of informed approaches. The champion role consisted of informed approach champions would support their teams, organisations to help identify areas for change. They would help embed a culture of change and monitor the changes that have been made, whilst identifying opportunities to improve the working practices. These champions were identified from services as those with an enthusiasm for the role, not those that are forced into the role. Again, it's about doing it alongside people rather than doing it to them. And a willingness to be the catalyst of change within their organisation, as well as those with a means to make organisational change happen. So when we recruited those champions, we recruited them from all different levels of organisations. There were some senior managers there were some people who worked in data, there was some people who worked directly with the people they work alongside. They attended monthly learning and reflective sessions to connect with other champions. They learned about informed approaches, reflected and shared experiences, and helped suggest ways to improve our current practices. They had access to bespoke training, resources, and events to gain knowledge, skills on informed approaches. They considered how to impact ways of working across teams by working together to strengthen informed approaches and by supporting colleagues to become more trauma, gender and culturally informed. They had the opportunity to contribute to improving the practices and knowledge base on how to develop the informed approaches, and they had the opportunity to be part of an informed community through the use of digital platforms. So, at Fulfilling Lives, we've created a toolkit to help support organisations to start the process of organisational change. It's not a definitive blueprint for trauma, gender and culturally informed practice. It's a tool to accompany other resources to support organisations with their journey to become more trauma, gender and culturally informed. This toolkit will be available. There'll be a newsletter that's going out within the next week or so, and there'll be a link there, and that toolkit will be available for everyone. So with that, I'd like to introduce Jen, who's an independent external trainer and facilitator, to talk to you.
Thank you very much. Right, so the Informed Approaches Toolkit. My name's Jennifer and I'm an independent trainer and researcher. I've worked with Fulfilling Lives over a number of years. In the last year, have worked with them to develop the Informed Approach Champions training programme, which we've delivered to 3 cohorts now. In the last couple of months, have written a toolkit to really pull together good practice guidance on developing champions networks, sort of spliced together with the learning we've had from the specific experience of the Champions Network, the Informed Approach Champions Network, and really hope to create a resource that any of you could, I want to say pick up off the shelf, but no one's going to actually print it out. So digitally, pick it up off your shelf, have a look through. If you want to, in your organisation, implement a Champions Network. I think one of the things to mention really about the whole Champions approach is it can only happen as part of an organisational commitment to change. If you get some champions and that's it, you're not going to go very far. Champions work in an environment within organisations that are willing and passionate and enthusiastic about changing their practice. We can't just put it on one person, one champion's head that they've got to create change. So just a slight, I wouldn't say warning, but, this isn't the answer. It's part of getting you towards the answer. So the brief was to create this cool toolkit. Organisations, communities can set up and run an Informed Approach Champions Network. as Ray said, the idea behind the network was to take learning from Fulfilling Lives out into the community. So the toolkit really is based around a model of there are going to be multiple organisations in a location, in an area, that want to come together and create this network cross-organisationally. It's not necessarily internal, but it's about that community, because it's about a whole community, a systems level change that we want to really create overall, as well as within organisations and amongst practitioners. So the toolkit, the contents, we've got an introduction, funnily enough. Tells you what the toolkit's for, who's it for, that kind of thing. There's some information about the Fulfilling Lives Informed Approach programme, so you can learn more about what Fulfilling Lives have done around informed approaches. Then there's a section on understanding an informed approach, and I'll come on to this in a bit more detail in a second. And then finally, the longest section is about that guidance for setting up the champion programme. So in terms of understanding an informed approach, this section, as Ray said, this is not a comprehensive review of how to be trauma and gender and culturally informed, because such a book would fill this room. So it is, I think it's about 30 pages long, but it's about giving you an overview, a starting point. Where do you start to be culturally, gender and trauma informed? Lots of resources, links to other documents. So if you want to go away and start doing this piece of work, or you want to start designing a training programme, you've got something there, somewhere to begin. So in terms, and one of the overriding approaches, about the entire programme, is this intersectional approach as well, that we're thinking about the whole of who somebody is. Yes, their experience of trauma, their gender, their culture, but their socioeconomic background as well, that if they have a disability, all those kind of things, all of that needs to be taken into account and is really what the focus, I think, certainly working with Ray and other people at Fulfilling Lives, it's about understanding people as a whole person, not just as labels, not as ACEs, but being really human about it. So that ties it all together, even though I sort of say this because there's sections on being trauma-informed, gender-informed, and culturally informed, but it's all interdependent and needs to be viewed as such. But in terms of what a trauma-informed approach is, these are the different subsections. So what is trauma, looking at different types of trauma, how they impact on people. I think already, Steph, you mentioned about how trauma impacts on people of different genders differently. People experience different types of trauma. The impact of trauma there in many different ways. Why a trauma-informed approach if you're not already convinced that this is an important approach to take? But sometimes it's about convincing commissioners that it's an important approach. I don't know if there's any commissioners in here. I don't want to disparage any of you. But you've got to have different arguments. There's got to be a financial argument for this sometimes, as well as the moral and the human argument. So understanding those different arguments is important. What is a trauma-informed approach? What does that look like? And then some really clear guidance on beginning to implement a trauma-informed approach in your organisation. So that's the blueprint for the section on trauma-informed. There's the same outline around gender and the same outline around culture in the toolkit. And then in terms of guidance for the section on guidance for an informed approach, I feel like I need to say something. There was something in my notes before that came up. I can't remember now. Oh well, we'll keep going. I'm sure it'll come back to me. So one of the subsections in the guidance is about setting up the network. So it's just giving you a flavour, really. And again, as I said before, this is about pulling together good practice guidance on champions, but also pulling in that experience we've had over the last year or two at Fulfilling Lives. So for setting up the network, it's about planning, it's about defining roles, responsibilities, expectations. And I hope you don't mind me sharing, Ray, but just a reflection on the champions. I think we went into this programme hoping they can be real change makers. And actually it's quite difficult. It really is, particularly if there's an organisation that goes, sure, go on the training, that's really great. Come back, let us know what you've learnt. and that's the end of the road. And so what we sort of came towards the end of the programme was that champions were more role models. In this programme so far, they've got to the place of being role models for their colleagues. And through that will make change, and that will lead to change. But unless there's that organisational buy-in, it's difficult to lead change. There's defining selection criteria and then recruiting champions. This is the kind of approach, sort of planning, setting up the programme, the structure that we were working towards in this programme. So as I said before, you've got your different organisations across a community, across a geographical area. Each one of those feeds into an informed approach board, which has come out of the work of Stephanie Covington and Karen Treisman, who are leaders in the work around trauma-informed practice. And they talk about having a trauma board. And we're talking about having an informed approach board with programme lead, administrator, comms lead. There's lots of comms involved in this kind of work. Can't forget that aspect of it. Experts by experience have been integral. Change leads, informed approach champion, representatives. So that's the kind of structure we were working towards. I think you'll get these slides, won't you? Will they get the slides? Yeah. And this is all in the toolkit, so you don't need to write it down. That's the kind of, it's thinking about that structure. What's it going to look like? What's it going to work? How's it going to work where you're operating or where you're working? And then in terms of defining the selection criteria, I found this really interesting. There's loads of information out there about what's a good champion. Tell me, what do you think? What are the good qualities in a champion? I'm going to take this away. Miranda. Willing to learn, absolutely. Willing to learn from their own experience as well, reflecting on their own experiences, practice. Anything else? What makes a good champion? Yep, absolutely. I was looking at lots of different guidance for different champions programs. There's one about fire safety and one about climate change and I don't know what. And it's interesting, some programs require more passion for this. Maybe you're very passionate about fire safety and that's my, I've got to reflect on that for me. But some of it, some might require more passion maybe than others. Anything else? Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. One more, anything else? Go on, what do you think over here, having run the programme? What would you think the key...
Willingness to change.
Willingness to change. Okay.
And a lot of the times we were taught how to do a job, when we first come into services, but we don't think to question that, and sometimes we don't. We're doing something without really thinking about, why do I do it that way?
Okay, brilliant. I've got a list here, it's the list from the toolkit. Having an understanding of the organisation, really important for people who are going to try and make change, that they understand their organisation. Being open to new ideas, enthusiastic about change, open to learning from experience, being open to taking risks, so that kind of links back to that. Having a voice, being able to build trusted relationships, being a teacher, a coach, being driven by values, being committed. Added to that, we felt that there were some additional criteria for the informed approach champions. I don't know if you can see this, but it's a deeply personal programme to go through. Actually, a lot of people are coming on and reflecting on their own life experiences of trauma, of gender, of culture, and being sort of reflecting on that before you come on the programme and the impact that those might have had is really important. So someone isn't coming in sort of blind to it and kind of being metaphorically hit by the content. Having some self-awareness of the support you might need and being open to asking for help if you need it through the programme. A real willingness to reflect on personal beliefs and values as well, which again, some of the programmes, some champions are very much around technical issues, as opposed to this, which really is about us as humans, and then a huge passion and commitment to being informed. A brief section on learning and development. This is the area that I'm most passionate about myself. We developed a whole training programme. The whole training programme isn't in the toolkit because that would mean I don't have a job. But we wanted to give you a framework for developing the training. We looked at competencies, preparing to deliver the training. There's a whole range of outcomes for each of the sessions that we ran that can help people to become trauma and gender culture informed, as well as becoming champions. So it's not just knowledge, but it's about that skills development and that confidence development as well. There's information about the programme, which ran, it's about a 3-4 month training programme, and then some further support as well that ran alongside that. There's training content, there's thoughts and advice about group development, and then about identifying training needs. And just as an example, in terms of the training content, becoming informed is the module for people thinking about implementing their knowledge in their organisation and sort of being that change lead in their organisation. So there's 3 learning outcomes there, and then a whole range of resources that can be used to inform that session. So there's lots of sections like that for each of the modules that we delivered. So yes, that's the toolkit. Do look out for the email when it comes. I think it will be good. Thank you.
So before we get to the questions, just some what we would like you to think about and take away from this. So first of all, an informed approach means treating trauma, gender and culture and staff wellbeing as all equally important. That's why we called it informed approaches and not just trauma-informed approaches.
How we support staff affects the service we deliver.
It's not about labelling, okay? It's about understanding, adjusting practices, then using strength-based, person-led approaches and relational approaches.
Trauma, gender and culturally informed training alone does not make an organisation informed. It takes a systematic approach to change how services are delivered.
Embedding informed approaches across all aspects of service design and delivery, and at every level of a system will reduce barriers that prevent people from accessing services.
Adapting service design and delivery with a focus on safety and accessibility.
And resisting tokenism, so not just giving staff half a day's training and then saying that they're all now trauma informed. So, questions? Is there any questions?
Yeah, thanks for that. That's good content. Really enjoyed that. I guess I've got 2 questions. One is kind of in relation to the toolkit. So I like how broad it is. One of the things that I find a bit challenging is it does depend on organisational capacity and scale a little bit. So I just wondered, I work for an organisation with about 50 members of staff, and I just wondered, with the toolkit, is there any sort of way that it can be scalable? So for example, if you're an organisation with, I don't know how many you guys have got working for you, I'm presuming in hundreds, then you might be able to sort of organise a structure like you have. Is there a way that it can be sort of scaled according to the size of the organisation a little bit, or not? Or?
Go on.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think the content, we've suggested a structure for the programme that's based on Fulfilling Lives example. Any of the content, I think, could be taken down and used as an internal organisational approach. Most of that, it's all relevant. If you have a large organisation, it scales up easily. If you've got 5 or 6 organisations in a local area who want to come together, then that works as well. I think there was quite a few smaller organisations that were part of, who were champions, who came on the training.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, Fulfilling Lives, Lambeth, Lewisham, Southwark, we're not hundreds. We were less than 50. So it's definitely scalable.
Okay. Quite a big investment for a smaller group.
Yeah.
The other question I had was maybe more of an operational one, which was just in relation to the staff wellbeing, talk about reflective practice.
Yeah.
And again, I think that is really important. We've had that in our organisation for a period of time, particularly before COVID. It was very well attended. During the last 2 years, it moved online, and most of the staff didn't engage with it very well at all. And so it kind of just fell apart. And I think think staff just depended on a few key relationships within an organisation rather than group dynamics to sort of stay healthy because they didn't have access to the same level of communal sharing that they had before. And we're sort of restoring reflective practice again for a group setting, which I think is healthy. But the uptake has been a lot lower than it was before COVID, and so now maybe only 30 or 40% of staff want to do reflective practice in a group setting, and the other group have just said, it's not for me, I don't want to do it. And I'm just wondering how that leaves us in terms of our health as an organisation. I don't want to mandate that people have to do reflective practice if it's not where their head is at, and if maybe they stay emotionally resilient in a different way. I just wondered if you had different experiences of how people have connected with reflective practice or not.
Yeah, it's the age-old problem with reflective practice that there's staff that will engage, and there's lots of staff that think that, you know, it's not for me, I don't want to engage with it. So one way of doing it is having safe spaces as well. So as you said, you know, there's colleagues that kind of connect together and provide that safe space. But it's also about staff understanding how it's also, you know, about their well-being as well, and about how they process, because it's about their own emotional processes. So then for them to be able to understand someone else's, the people they work alongside's emotional processes. And one of the things we looked at is that when you do one-to-one supervision, so reflective practice doesn't have to be done in a group, you know, it can be done on a one-to-one basis as well. But we also looked at one-to-one supervision and how that's done, and not having, you know, supervision where it's just about, oh, well, you haven't done this, you need to meet this target, you haven't done that. It's also about them taking responsibility for their own well-being, and managers encouraging them, supporting them to take responsibility for their own well-being, and reflective practice being that as well, if that makes sense.
No, that's really helpful. Thank you.
I just wanted to add that we also had, before COVID, we had a psychologist specifically for reflective practice, and that wasn't very helpful for our organisation. So we've had to chop and change and adapt how we do reflective practice, and from that we found what Ray just explained, that different things work for different people. Any more questions? Pardon?
You said that there was a psychologist that you had before COVID.
Yeah, for reflective practice. Yeah.
Why? Do you know why?
People just didn't really engage. I don't know if it was, I can't pinpoint, but I think part of the style of how it was delivered, a lot of the people that were working in the communities found that they would rather be actively doing something than taking time out to have these conversations. And I think it was the level of vulnerabilities, people were not comfortable with sharing such in group spaces.
Yeah, and a psychologist doesn't necessarily make a good reflective practitioner. And it was all about the quality of the reflective practitioner. So what we did, we brought in someone who was amazing. She's been doing it for many years, and we had a really good reflective practitioner. And the champions, they got reflective practice. They've got it still right the way through to the end of the programme, even though they finished the training. We've still provided that for them.
And as a part of the program, you mentioned that you set up a Wellbeing forum. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so we set up a Wellbeing forum, started in the thick of COVID. So obviously that's when we really realised. And it was a combination of our ideas as an organisation, what we wanted to see. So we have a book club. What else did we have? We had Pampers come out.
Yeah,
that was a good idea.
We had various wellbeing events where people could just connect in small groups, non-work related, just to kind of connect with them.
Yeah.
It's worth mentioning though, and one of the things we really learned was that, so we had our trauma-informed board, and what happened was that inadvertently, the one thing that we didn't want to happen happened, and the well-being got split off and given to one person. And what happens then is that it gets sidelined a little bit, and that kind of happened with the culture as well. So this is something that we learned. And then because what happens then, the well-being doesn't take the same priority as the trauma work. So that was something that we had to think about. And you have to make a real effort and be really mindful that the well-being has to be a part of that main focus. And that's a mistake we made, but that's something that we wrote about so other organisations could try and avoid it.
Yeah, part of our learning.
Sorry, just one quick question. How did you go about selecting your partners? I'm just thinking about the existing courses and mental health as in organisational enterprises like that. Did you go off any kind of existing training material out there for our organisation using the toolkit? Would you, yes, I remember recommendations you had along kind of.
With regards to the training
Yeah,
itself.
so just kind of the aspects that kind of come into well-being. So if you had someone who's wanted to, for example, the Greenwich Cafe, so they want to do like training specifically in mental health. Are there other partners that you would recommend, or would you say use the toolkit kind of stuff? If that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, we worked with trainers, Jen, who we knew well, and we'd had training from her in another kind of aspect, in another organisation. So we knew the quality of her work, so we were able to work with Jen to look at what specific aspects we needed to bring into that forum. And we also worked with, with Karen Treisman. She's delivered like 5 whole day sessions on different aspects of informed approaches, which has been amazing because she really knows her stuff.
So both avenues work. Like if you have partners that you could work with, like that's fantastic. But also if you was just to go off the toolkit, it would work as well. Yeah, your hand up here. That's a good question.
What's the key challenges?
Key changes.
Changes.
Key changes. So
With external organisations, from the people we've chosen within the organisation. Well, we can. If we had the people like our link workers, if they were here, they'd tell you all about how their work has changed with how they develop. It's become really about a person-led, relational approach, and the work we've done has just cemented that.
yeah.
I think with one of the, a lot of our staff had quite good knowledge around trauma. One of the things that one of the staff mentioned to us, it was just about how the physical aspects of trauma, that she never really realised, and that really connected her with some of the physical things that was happening with some of the people she worked with. How that trauma was manifesting physically, where she knew about trauma, but she hadn't kind of connected with that. It's changed the language we use a lot in the service, and that's throughout the whole service. So not just the people who work directly with the people we support, but also like when it comes to data, when we're inputting data into a system, we use a language. When we're emailing other organisations, we're really looking out for that language, which is stereotyping, blaming, rather than supporting.
Yeah. And I just wanted to say that with the culture work that we've done, that's a lot on the workforce development itself. However, obviously because the program's about to end, we've had to stop working with the people that we support. However, in the training that we've done to become like more culturally competent, in group discussions, etc., people have like just had insight and just like the language and just behaviours and labelling, etc. In like vulnerability and just safe spaces, we've just had conversations where we're almost on similar levels of understanding, which will then positively impact the work that we do. So obviously we're going to all go our separate ways once the program ends. However, we just hope that these trainings that we could just carry on and just like share our knowledge in the new organisations that we go into.
Can I just add, I think that's a really important point, and something, Ray, you've always talked about. It's not necessarily only about the change now, but also for all the champions that have come through the programme, where they go on to next. They're the leaders of the future, and it's kind of infusing the whole of the community with this knowledge through the programme as well.
Yeah. So, guys, thank you so much for staying awake. And but also I wanted to say that we have the breathing techniques and there's like some well-being stuff during the lunch break, and I was told to remember to say it, so I'm remembering. But yeah, that's the end of our first workshop. But if you have any more questions, thank you.